Madeline Bishop leaned on the edge of the marble counter, her fingers wrapped around a mug of herbal tea she hadn't taken a sip of. She could see her reflection in the glass doors across the room. Hair smooth, nails perfect, dress, wrinkle-free, a walking embodiment of Cameron Bishop's vision. He called her his calm in chaos. But some days she wondered if he actually liked her quiet, or if it just made her easier to control. She placed the mug down carefully. No sound, no mess. Just like everything else in this house. Across the open living room, soft music hummed from recessed speakers, a string quartet version of a pop song she didn't recognize. Cameron had picked the playlist. Cameron picked everything, from her clothing to the art on the walls, to which friends were worth keeping. Spoiler, very few made the cut. She walked slowly toward the expansive glass doors, barefoot on the cool floors. Outside, the infinity pool mirrored the sunset. Beyond it, the lake stretched into the horizon like a secret she could never reach. In her hand, a small white box. Inside, a pair of pale yellow knitted baby booties she had bought from a tiny boutique on South Congress, one of the few errands she'd done without Cameron's driver. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Cass, her best friend whom she hadn't seen in almost a year. 6 weeks. That's how long she'd been carrying the secret. And despite everything, a part of her still believed the news would change everything, that it would soften him, bring him back to her, if he had ever really been hers to begin with. The front door opened a soft hiss from the smart lock system, followed by Cameron's voice echoing down the hallway. Mets, she turned quickly, instinctively, straightening her shoulders, in the kitchen. Cameron entered, phone still in hand, Bluetooth earpiece in place. He looked sharp, as always. Navy blazer, no-tie, tailored shirt, open, just enough to say, confident, not casual. His brown hair was combed to perfection, not a strand out of place. He glanced up at her for half a second, then back at his phone. "We're moving the gala to the Four Seasons rooftop," he said, still half in conversation. "Better skyline, better press photos." She smiled faintly. "I didn't know we were involved in the planning." "We're not, but we are the face of Viridian Labs. And this year I'm not just accepting an award, I'm locking down the next funding round." He finally looked at her eyes, sharp behind the charm. "I'll need you radiant, supportive, and sharp. Don't let the cameras catch you blinking." A pause. He smiled. It was the practiced one, the one that won investors, not hearts. She held up the box, suddenly nervous. "I got something today." He raised an eyebrow. "Another dress. No, it's..." She hesitated, heartbeat skipping. "I thought I'd give it to you tomorrow night, after the gala." His eyes flicked to the box, then back to her. He didn't ask what it was, just nodded, distracted again by his phone buzzing. "Wear the green silk," he said already, walking toward the bedroom. "And go easy on the makeup. You look best when you're soft." She stood still, fingers tightening around the box. Soft. That word echoed too long in the room. It meant small, compliant, seen, not heard. When they first met, he'd said it like a compliment, like he was tired of the loud, the messy, the ambitious. He'd told her she was real, a breath of fresh air. But lately, soft felt like a warning. She followed him to the hallway, still holding the box. Cameron. He stopped at the doorway, back turned. "What is it?" She swallowed. "Do you remember when we used to go out just to walk, like before the IPO? You used to say we didn't need all of this." He looked over his shoulder, slightly annoyed. "What's your point? I miss you." He blinked. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, stretching too long. "I'm right here," he said finally, but it landed flat. Empty. No warmth, no return. He turned into the bedroom and shut the door behind him, not hard, just final. Maddie stood alone in the hallway, the last of the sunlight gone. She pressed the box to her chest and closed her eyes. Inside her, a life was growing, quietly, invisibly. She didn't want to cry. Not yet. Instead, she walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the leather sofa staring at the empty fireplace Cameron had built for aesthetics, not heat. Her phone buzzed on the table. A notification from her calendar app. Gala tomorrow, 6:00 p.m. Viridian Labs hosts at Four Seasons, Austin. Underneath it, a photo from a year ago appeared her and Cameron at last year's event. She was wearing a champagne dress, laughing. He had his hand on the small of her back, smiling like a man in love. Looking at it now, it felt staged. Or maybe it had always been. She set the phone down and finally opened the box. The baby booties looked smaller than she remembered. She ran her fingers over the soft yarn and whispered more to herself than to anyone, "I'm going to make this work." Somehow. Behind her, the house adjusted its lighting again, dimming for evening mode, as if sadness could be softened with ambient light. Outside, the lake darkened into stillness, and somewhere out there under the same sky, the life she used to dream about was fading while another waited to begin. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The rooftop of the Four Seasons glowed under string lights that stretched above the heads of Austin's most powerful. From this height, the city below shimmered like a promise. A string quartet played a slow, haunting version of a pop song, and servers floated between clusters of guests with flutes of champagne and plates of seared tuna on edible flowers. Maddie stood near the edge, one hand resting on her barely there bump, the other clutching a delicate silver clutch. The green silk gown Cameron had chosen for her fit like it had been sewn onto her body, but it didn't feel like hers. It felt like a borrowed identity, one that shimmered just enough to distract from everything missing underneath. "You look like money," Cameron whispered as he approached from behind his hand, grazing her back. His smile was sharp for the cameras, but his tone was brisk, rehearsed. "Thanks," she replied, her voice soft. He didn't look at her. His eyes scanned the crowd, already calculating, already working. Tonight wasn't about her. It never was. It was about Viridian Labs, about perception, about the next billion-dollar valuation. The MC's voice echoed through the speakers, announcing Cameron as Austin's visionary of the year. Polite applause rose like steam. Maddie smiled, because that's what she was there to do. Cameron moved through the crowd, shaking hands, posing for photos, charming the board members with his signature blend of charisma and ambition. She watched him with the same detachment she reserved for luxury ads, polished perfect and completely unreachable. A voice cut through her trance. "That man could sell ice in the desert." Maddie turned. A woman stood beside her holding a glass of champagne, dressed in red satin that fit like temptation. Her dark hair was pulled into a low twist, simple yet elegant. Her skin glowed under the ambient lights, and her lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Zara Monroe," the woman said, extending a hand. Maddie hesitated, taking it slowly. "Madeline Bishop." "Oh, I know," Zara said, her voice warm and cool at the same time. "Wife of the genius." Maddie smiled politely. "Something like that." Zara sipped her drink and looked out over the edge of the rooftop. "You must be proud." Cameron's speech was flawless, so confident, so precise, like every word was calibrated. "He's good at speeches." Among other things, Zara said too casually. Maddie felt the temperature shift, not in the air, but in her chest. She tilted her head, trying to hold her expression. "I take it you've worked with him?" Zara glanced at her, amused. "Oh, not officially. My father is a key investor in his next funding round. We've all had a few dinners together. Strategy talks, mostly." Maddie opened her mouth, but before she could reply, Zara leaned in just slightly, her voice dropping. "Off the record. He talks about you often." Maddie blinked. Really? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zara smiled. He says you're serene, quiet, a calming influence. She paused. Not many women would be comfortable playing that role. The words dropped like stones into Maddie's stomach. Before she could respond, a sudden rush of warmth flooded her chest, followed by a sharp, dizzying sensation behind her eyes. The lights seemed too bright, the music too loud. Her heart fluttered unpredictably and her knees felt wrong, loose, untrustworthy. She whispered, pressing her fingers to her temple. Maddie Zara's voice was distant, now muffled by the roaring in her ears. The edges of the rooftop blurred. A waiter nearby called out something, but it sounded far away. And then everything went soft. She didn't fall hard. She simply folded, as if her body gave up slowly, quietly, under the weight of everything she'd been carrying. When she came to, she was lying on a chaise lounge in a private room, the echo of laughter and clinking glasses still audible beyond the closed doors. Cameron stood over her, speaking to someone in hushed tones. A hotel nurse, young efficient, took her pulse. "She's okay," the nurse said. "Just fainted. Probably dehydration stress. It happens, especially at these things." "I told her to eat more today," Cameron muttered. "She's been skipping meals." Maddie stirred. "I didn't," he cut her off with a tight smile. "Shh. Let's just get you home." "But the gala." "It's fine. I've done what I needed to do. Everyone saw us together. That's what matters. That's what matters." He thanked the nurse with a firm nod and helped Maddie to her feet. She felt unsteady, like the world was still tilted. As they left the room, she noticed Zara standing by the door. She wasn't smiling anymore. Just watching, with a look that lingered. In the car, silence stretched between them. Maddie looked out the tinted window, her fingers curled tightly around her clutch. The baby booties were still inside. She had planned to give them to Cameron tonight, after his speech, in a quiet moment of victory. Now the idea felt almost absurd. He pulled out his phone before the car even reached the toll road. "Zara handled the media fine," he said, scrolling. "She's good at smoothing things." Maddie turned her head slowly. "You left me alone," she said. "I arranged care." "You didn't stay." He looked at her finally. "I can't afford to be emotional, Maddie. Not right now. Everything is riding on the next quarter. You fainting was unfortunate, but it doesn't need to be a headline." She stared at him. There were no raised voices, no overt cruelty, just calculation. A long moment passed. She reached into her clutch and gently pulled out the box. "This was supposed to be a gift," she said. "A surprise." He looked at it but didn't reach for it. "What is it?" She opened it slowly. The booties sat in soft tissue paper. Pale yellow. Delicate. His eyes didn't move. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. 6 weeks. Silence. Cameron blinked. Once, then again. "That's unexpected," he said at last. His voice didn't change. Not warm, not cold, just measured. "I wanted to tell you when we were alone, when things felt right." "They're not right, Maddie, not right now." He turned back to his phone. "Let's not make any big announcements just yet." She sat, frozen beside him. The city lights outside blurred into streaks of gold and blue. Her hand closed the box again. Gently, deliberately. The rest of the ride passed in silence. The house was silent when they returned. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the oppressive kind. The kind that fills every corner like fog, dampening sound, smothering light. Maddie stepped inside slowly, the silver box still in her hand, though the weight of it felt different now. Heavier, not just from disappointment, but from something quieter, colder. Cameron walked ahead of her without a word. His phone was still in his hand. She watched him disappear down the hall, the tailored line of his suit jacket sharp against the soft shadows. He didn't even glance back. She stood alone in the entryway for a long moment before moving toward the stairs. The booties were warm in her hand, as if they still held the echo of hope. She placed the box gently on her nightstand. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on her thighs, waiting for something to catch up with her. But nothing came. No anger, no tears, just a slow, aching emptiness. It was after midnight when she realized Cameron wasn't coming to bed. She wandered into the kitchen, half hoping he'd be there fixing one of his post-gala protein shakes, offering some half-hearted apology. Instead, she found only a clean counter untouched since their housekeeper had left that afternoon. Her phone vibrated on the bar. She hadn't even realized she left it there. She unlocked it, expecting a few messages from Cass or old friends who might have seen the gala photos. But the notifications were different. Bank alert. Access to joint checking restricted. Credit card transaction declined at pharmacy pickup. Account privileges updated contact administrator. Her stomach dropped. She blinked, refreshed the screen, and tapped into her account. Access denied. She tried again. Same result. A chill settled under her skin. She opened the family calendar app Cameron had insisted they share a way to stay in sync. Her usual profile image had been replaced with a default icon. The guest permissions icon glowed in red. Guest, she whispered. The door to Cameron's office was closed. She hadn't seen him go in. The hallway lights had dimmed to evening mode, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. She hovered near the door, pressing her hand to the frame for balance. She didn't knock. She listened. Through the door, faint murmurs, his voice low. Then a soft, unmistakable laugh, not his. Zara. Not over speakerphone, not distant, not professional. Close. Her chest tightened. She backed away, slow and careful, like movement might trigger something worse. She made it to the guest bedroom and sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to breathe evenly. Maybe it's a business call. Maybe it's harmless. Maybe it's... Her phone buzzed again. This time a notification from Instagram. Zara Monroe posted a new story. She didn't want to click it. She did anyway. A hotel suite, city lights, 2 champagne glasses, one hand manicured nails, blood-red polish adjusting the camera. Then her voice. A little post-gala unwind. Nothing like celebrating with someone who sees your worth. The video cut to a slow pan of a watch. Cameron's. Monogrammed. The glass nearly slipped from Maddie's hand. She dropped the phone onto the comforter, pressing her fingers to her temples. It wasn't just a hunch. It wasn't a suspicion born from insecurity. It was happening. She stood suddenly, heart pounding, and paced the room like the walls were closing in. And then a wave of nausea. Sharp and sudden. She barely made it to the bathroom, in time holding herself over the sink as her stomach twisted. Tears came, then not from the sickness but from the humiliation of it, of carrying something so sacred inside her while standing in the middle of such betrayal. She rinsed her mouth, braced her hands on the counter, and stared at her reflection. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair had lost its shape. She didn't look like the woman from the gala. She didn't look like the wife of a billionaire. She looked like someone who'd been left behind in her own life. The next morning, Cameron was gone. Not a note, not a text, just a silent kitchen and a blinking message on the fridge screen. Out early. Don't wait up. She sat at the breakfast bar, trying to eat a piece of toast, but her stomach turned at the thought. When the housekeeper arrived, Maddie tried to smile. She failed. Mrs. Bishop, is everything all right? Maddie opened her mouth, then closed it. The words didn't come. She stood slowly and excused herself, walking back to the master bedroom. She closed the door gently behind her and opened Cameron's closet. Neatly pressed shirts, lined-up suits, the smell of cedar and cologne. She reached up, tugged down a small black box, one of his client gift keepsakes. Inside were receipts, travel, dinners, jewelry. One stood out. Cartier, for $200, Madison Avenue. Her breath caught. That wasn't for her. It hadn't been for her in months. Her hands trembled as she pulled her phone from her robe pocket. She opened Zara's Instagram again and scrolled back through her posts. There it was, a close-up of her wrist. Gold and diamonds. Caption, "When you're finally seen." Maddie sat down on the floor, the black box still in her lap, her back against the wall. The baby shifted. Just a flutter. Barely there. She closed her eyes. "You're real," she whispered to the tiny life inside her. "And you're the only thing keeping me from vanishing." She opened her eyes slowly. Her gaze drifted to her phone screen again. At the bottom of the screen, the emergency contact was still saved, Harlan Reed. Dad. She hadn't spoken to him in almost 3 years. But something inside her, something deep and ancient, whispered that maybe it was time. Not for rescue, but for remembrance of who she used to be, before Cameron, before the glass house, before the silence. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, but it brought no warmth. Maddie stood in the doorway of Cameron's study, staring at the smooth surface of his mahogany desk. It was pristine, cleared off except for a leather planner, a branded pen, and his Cartier cufflinks glinting under the light like tiny trophies. Everything in this house looked perfect. Everything but her. She stepped inside slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the marble. The office had always felt like a forbidden room. He never said she couldn't enter, but the energy was always clear. This was his space, his world. She just lived adjacent to it. But today, something pulled her in. She sat in his chair. It smelled like his cologne. She reached for the laptop. The screen lit up instantly. Cameron was never one to use passwords. He assumed no one had the courage to snoop. Or maybe he just didn't think she was capable. She opened his browser. Calendar, email, business folders. At first, everything looked normal. Clean, professional, boring. Then she noticed a folder tucked under private. It wasn't labeled with anything suspicious. Just 3 letters, ZRM. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. She clicked. Inside photos, dinner reservations, hotel bookings. One email stood out, forwarded from Zara's assistant. He liked the red one. "I'll wear it to the investor brunch," attached a mirror selfie. Zara, in a slinky red dress Maddie had seen before. The same one she wore the night of the gala. Maddie sat very still, the air around her frozen in place. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just stopped. Her eyes scanned the next email. "Cameron, my father will commit to the 20 Mistress if the merger talk becomes official. But I need assurance. You promised visibility. Don't let me fade into the background." It wasn't just a fling. It wasn't even about love. It was business. Transactional. Strategic. Cold. She closed the laptop gently. Then she stood. She walked out of the study, down the hall, into the master bedroom. She opened her drawer and pulled out the velvet box. The baby booties stared up at her like a memory she hadn't earned yet. She put them back slower this time. The sound of the drawer sliding shut felt too final. Downstairs, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Cass Holbrook. For the first time in months, someone familiar. Someone not filtered through Cameron's lens. She answered with a shaky breath. Cass, oh my God. Cass said, her voice rushing through the line. You're alive. Maddie tried to smile. That's debatable. I saw you at the gala. You looked, I don't even know, like a painting, but also like you were fading. Maddie walked slowly to the patio doors, opening them just enough to let the breeze in. I fainted, she said, in front of everyone. Cass's voice softened. Are you okay? There was a pause. Maddie stepped outside, barefoot on the warm stone. I'm pregnant. Silence. And then, wait, Maddie. Does he know I told him? Her voice cracked just once. He told me not to make any announcements. Said it wasn't the right time. Oh, my Mads. I think he's having an affair. Maddie added her words, almost weightless. Actually, I know he is. It's with Zara Monroe. He's merging with her father's firm. And me, her voice wavered. I'm just part of the furniture. Pretty, quiet, soft. Cass exhaled hard. I should have stayed in touch. He isolated you, didn't he, piece by piece. You don't deserve this. I don't know what I deserve anymore. You deserve someone who sees you. All of you. Not someone who edits you to fit his brand. Maddie closed her eyes, letting the words soak in. Then she whispered. He locked me out of our accounts, what restricted my access, froze the cards. My name isn't even on the calendar anymore. There was a long, loaded silence. Cass's voice returned firmer. You have to get out of there. I don't know where I'd even go. Your dad, nor Maddie. We haven't spoken in years. Then maybe it's time. Maddie looked out over the lake. The water was still, silent, deep. She heard herself say it before she could think too much. I still have his number. Then call it. Maddie ended the call and sat down at the edge of the chaise lounge. She opened her contacts, scrolled, found it. Harlan Reed, Dad. She stared at it for a long time. She hadn't called him since the wedding. He hadn't approved of Cameron. Said he didn't like men who smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. She'd told him he was being dramatic. And then she stopped calling. Now. She needed him, but not to fix things, just to remind her who she was before this house, before the dresses, before the silence. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then click. A voice. Calm. Familiar. Reed. She froze. Dad, she whispered. There was a pause, a breath. Then his voice slightly softer. Maddie. Her throat closed. I didn't know who else to call. Where are you, Austin? Another pause. Are you safe? No. Stay where you are, he said. I'm coming. She opened her mouth to speak, but he had already hung up. She stared at the phone screen. Then she looked out across the lake. Something was shifting. Not fast, but quietly, like the beginning of a storm too far to hear, but impossible to stop. The sun had barely begun to rise when Maddie stepped out onto the front steps of the house she no longer recognized as home. The early morning air in Austin was soft, thick with dew, the lake beyond the hill cloaked in low-hanging mist. She clutched her light coat closer around her, more out of instinct than cold. Inside, everything was still. Cameron hadn't come home. Or if he hadn't made a sound. She didn't check. Her suitcase sat by the door, not overstuffed just enough for now. A few dresses, toiletries. The ultrasound photo folded neatly between the pages of a journal she hadn't written in since their engagement. The baby booties tucked carefully into a side pocket. She heard the tires before she saw the vehicle. A quiet engine, slow and sure, crunching over the gravel. A black SUV pulled up the circular driveway. Not one of Cameron's. Not a Viridian Labs transport. This was different. The driver's door opened, and there he was. Harlan Reed. She hadn't seen her father in 3 years, but time hadn't softened him much. His hair was silver, now cut short, his frame still solid beneath a dark jacket and jeans. He looked like a man who had built things with his hands, and later ran companies with a phone that never left his pocket. He stepped out, eyes locked on her. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he said, "You ready?" Her throat tightened. "I think so." He looked past her toward the house, expression unreadable. "Do I need to come in?" She shook her head. "Everything that matters is out here." A slight nod. He walked around the car, opened the passenger door for her. No questions, no lectures, just space. She slid in the door, shutting with a satisfying finality. As the SUV rolled down the driveway, she looked back only once. The house stood still, gleaming in the rising sun, a beautiful cage dressed in glass and money. But it didn't follow her. It didn't beg her to stay. Inside, Cameron was likely still sleeping, or maybe sending a morning text to Zara. She turned her gaze forward. "How long was the drive?" she asked softly. 3 hours, Harlan replied, eyes on the road. "Left at 4. She looked over at him. "You didn't have to come so fast." He kept driving. "You said you weren't safe. That's fast enough." She folded her hands in her lap, silent for a moment. "I didn't leave because I was afraid," she said quietly. "Not of him anyway. He's never hurt me. Not physically." "I didn't ask," he said. "But it's good to hear. It was more like being erased." Harlan glanced at her, then back at the road. "That can be worse." They drove in silence for a while, the city falling away behind them. Austin's skyline gave way to fields and stretches of quiet hill country. Eventually, Maddie spoke again. "I'm pregnant." His hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "How far along?" "Almost 7 weeks." He nodded once, the lines around his mouth softening. "You sure about this?" "I am now." "Good." She watched him for a long moment. "I know we ended badly." "We didn't end," he said. "You stopped calling because you didn't come to the wedding." He sighed deep and low. "Because I knew that man wouldn't protect you. I thought you were being controlling. I was being a father." She blinked hard. "Why didn't you fight harder?" He slowed the car as they reached a winding turn, then looked at her. "Because the last thing a woman needs is another man trying to control her decisions, even if he's right." The words landed like something between an apology and a lesson. She turned her face towards the window, blinking away the emotion building behind her eyes. "I'm not the same person," she said softly. "I didn't come to rescue her," he replied. "I came for you." They didn't say much after that. By the time they pulled up to his ranch outside Bourne, the sun was full in the sky. The house was nothing like Cameron's, a long, weathered home, with wraparound porches, wide rocking chairs, and wildflowers growing around the gravel walk. Real, solid, unfiltered. She stepped out of the car slowly, the air crisper out here. Fresher. As they walked toward the door, a golden retriever bounded around the corner, tail wagging. "Still got Samson?" Maddie asked, surprised. "New one. Samson Jr., the first one passed a year ago." The dog trotted up to her, nuzzling into her hand, as if they'd known each other forever. She smiled. For the first time in days, it wasn't forced. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and coffee. The kitchen was warm, lived in. Photographs lined the hallway, some old, some new. A few she hadn't seen before. Her mother's smile. A picture of her at age 10, mud on her boots, holding a fish almost as big as her arm. "You kept these?" she asked, brushing her fingers along a frame. "Didn't have a reason to take 'em down." She turned, looked at him. "You really didn't move on, did you?" "I waited," he said simply. "Sometimes people come back when they're ready to remember who they are." She walked to the window, staring out at the wide field beyond. I don't know what I'm doing. You don't have to. He poured her a cup of coffee, then paused. Tea, she nodded. As he handed it to her, she finally let the silence settle. Not the kind she'd known with Cameron. This one was safe, gentle, room to breathe. Can I stay? She asked, voice low. Harlan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his back pocket, pulled out a single old key, and handed it to her. This was always yours. She clutched it tight, holding it to her chest like it might unlock more than just a door. Outside, the wind stirred the fields. Somewhere far behind them, Austin buzzed with its usual noise. But out here, something had started. Not escape, not retreat. A return. To roots. To self. To something that couldn't be bought or betrayed. Only remembered. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the fields as Maddie sat on the back porch, wrapped in her cardigan, a steaming mug of ginger tea in hand. The breeze was cool, tinged with dew and wild sage, and the only sounds were Samson Jr. pacing in the tall grass and birds greeting the day. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. But inside her chest, the ache remained, not sharp anymore, just present, persistent, like grief that didn't know its name yet. She rubbed a hand over her belly gently. 7 weeks. Still so small but growing. She hadn't felt anything yet, no flutters, no kicks, just the weight of the future slowly gathering under her skin. You sleep all right? Harlan's voice broke the quiet as he stepped out onto the porch with a cup of his own. She glanced up and gave a small smile. Better than I have in a while. He nodded and sat down beside her in the adjacent rocking chair, both of them creaking in rhythm with the breeze. For a while they didn't talk, and that was the beauty of it. She didn't need to fill the silence to be safe. But eventually she asked, How did you know he didn't look at her, just sipped his coffee? That Cameron wasn't it. She nodded. I've seen men like him before, smile too wide, promise too big, take without flinching. She stared out across the pasture. I didn't want to believe it. You weren't wrong for trusting him, Harlan said. You were wrong for forgetting yourself. The words landed hard, but not unkindly. She swallowed. I didn't realize how far I'd gone until I couldn't even pay for a bottle of prenatal vitamins. Harlan's jaw shifted, his eyes still trained on the horizon. That man cut you off. She nodded, quietly. Like it was just a technicality. But I know what it was. It was control. Harlan's hand tightened slightly around his cup. She turned to him. I don't need revenge. I don't want to hurt him. I just want my life back. He finally looked at her, really looked. Then we start with that. A beat passed before he added, You're not the only one who lost something. She tilted her head. I lost my daughter, he said. The day she chose to marry a man who needed her silent to shine. Tears pricked her eyes. You didn't lose me, she whispered. I just forgot where I came from. A rustle from inside the house interrupted the moment, and a voice called out, Dad, are you home? Maddie's brow furrowed. Before Harlan could answer, the screen door swung open and a man stepped out. Tall, sun-kissed with sandy brown hair and a leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He froze when he saw Maddie. She blinked. I'm sorry, who right, Harlan said, quickly standing. Maddie, this is Caleb. He manages the ranch's tech side, now contracts operations expansion stuff. He moved back from Denver a few months ago. Caleb offered a small wave. Didn't mean to barge in. You didn't, Maddie said, standing slowly. I'm just visiting. Caleb looked at her closely, something in his expression shifting from polite to curious. You're Maddie. She hesitated. Yes, His gaze softened. You used to run barefoot through the creek beds out here. I remember you from when I was a kid. You'd never wear shoes unless someone made you. She laughed, surprised. That sounds about right. He grinned. I'm Caleb Lorne. My mom used to run the tack shop down on Willow Street. Wait, Mrs. Lorne with the pies. That's the one. I loved her peach cobbler. She still makes it. I'll make sure she brings one by. Their smiles held for a moment longer than necessary. Harlan watched, arms crossed. I'll let y'all talk, he said, stepping back inside. I've got calls to make. The screen door shut behind him, and Maddie found herself suddenly self-conscious. Caleb leaned against the porch rail, his voice lighter. So, you're back. I don't know if it's permanent, she said gently, resting her hand over her stomach. But I needed somewhere real. He nodded slowly. This place does that. It has a way of reminding you who you are. She looked at him, then really looked. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hands slightly calloused, and his smile was easy, unpolished, unpracticed. Like he hadn't memorized a brand guide for how to talk to people. It was refreshing. Can I ask something, he said. Sure. That day you left years ago, you were glowing. Whole town said you were headed for the good life. Big money, big future. But now, you're here. Alone, pregnant. His voice wasn't judgmental, just searching. I chased a life that looked shiny, she said softly. But it wasn't built on anything true. Turns out glass castles still shatter. He nodded, his eyes steady. Well, maybe it's time to build something different. Her breath caught slightly at the sincerity in his tone. Maybe she whispered. The porch went quiet again, but the silence was different, now charged, like something new had been cracked open between them. A window? A possibility. After a moment, Caleb pushed off the rail. Well, I've got a meeting with your dad in 20. But it's good to see you, Maddie. Real good. You too, Caleb. He turned to go, then paused. I'm around if you need anything. Even if it's just peach cobbler. She smiled. I might take you up on that. As he disappeared inside, Maddie stood on the porch a little longer, her fingers tracing the curve of her stomach. There was a long road ahead. But for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. The scent of fresh hay and blooming wildflowers filled the air as Maddie walked along the edge of the pasture, her boots crunching lightly against the gravel path. Morning sun poured through the trees, warming her face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like she was being watched, or managed, or judged. Just present. She paused near the fence line, pressing one hand to the curve of her stomach. The baby was still quiet. But she could feel a shift in herself, something slow and steady, reawakening. It was strange the way stillness could feel more honest than any grand gesture. Morning walk. She turned to find Caleb leaning against the old wooden gate, arms crossed, a small thermos in his hand. His hair was still damp from a shower, his shirt half tucked like he hadn't been trying too hard, which made him look more grounded than anyone she'd known in years. I needed air, Maddie said. You always did, he said with a soft smile. Used to sneak out before sunrise and climb the water tower. Drove your dad crazy. He told you that. He told me a lot of things yesterday. She raised an eyebrow. Don't worry, Caleb added. He didn't spill any secrets. Just said you were strong. And stubborn. And maybe needed someone around who remembers the sound of your laugh. Maddie blinked, caught off guard by the sudden lump in her throat. I don't laugh much these days, she said quietly. Maybe it's time to change that. He held out the thermos. It's chamomile. Made it for the office, but I figured you could use something gentle. She took it, fingers brushing his for a second longer than necessary. Thanks. You settling in okay? I'm trying, she said. There's still this voice in my head, asking if I've failed. Caleb tilted his head. You didn't fail, Maddie. You woke up. She looked down the steam from the tea swirling between them like a thin fog. Everything looked so perfect for a while. Cameron. The company. Our house. I thought if I just kept smiling, I could grow into that version of me. And now she looked up at him, eyes clear. Now I want to grow into someone I recognize. He smiled. Not big, just enough. Come help me with the stables, he said, pushing off the gate. I'll show you what grounded looks like. She hesitated, then followed. Inside the stables, the air was rich with hay, warm earth, and the gentle snorts of horses settling into their morning routines. Caleb handed her a pair of gloves and led her toward one of the stalls. This one's Rowdy, he said, but don't let the name fool you. He's a softy. Lost his mate last year, hasn't been quite the same. Maddie reached out slowly, brushing her fingers along the horse's muzzle. Rowdy leaned into the touch. I know how that feels, she whispered. Caleb watched her carefully but didn't push. They worked side by side for the next hour, feeding, brushing, adjusting the bedding. Maddie moved slowly but steadily, her body still adjusting, but her hands remembering the rhythm of simpler things. Movement without pretense. Purpose without pressure. I forgot how much I missed this, she said as they stepped out into the light again. You were never meant for glass towers, Caleb said. You were meant for open skies. She looked up. The sun was rising higher, burning off the last traces of morning mist. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted, not dark, but careful. Everything okay? She asked. He hesitated. There's something you should know. Her stomach clenched. What is it? He lowered his voice. One of my contacts in Austin sent me a news brief. Cameron's name came up. Her breath caught. What kind of news? Caleb turned the screen toward her. It was a digital business report, brief, sharp, and cold. Viridian Labs CEO to consolidate with Monroe Holdings. Inside sources confirm merger will be expedited following internal restructuring. Below the headline, a photo, Cameron in a tailored suit, hand at the small of Zara's back as they exited a conference. Maddie felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. He didn't even wait. She handed the phone back, her hand trembling slightly. He's trying to make it official, she murmured, before anyone questions the overlap. You think he's doing it to bury your name? Caleb asked. She nodded slowly. Cameron doesn't like loose ends. And a pregnant, estranged wife with access to his past? That's not good PR. Caleb's voice hardened slightly. You think he'll try to control the narrative he already is? She stared out at the field, jaw tight. I gave up everything to build that life with him, she said. And he's rewriting the story as if I never existed. Caleb stepped closer, not crowding her, just enough for his voice to drop. Then maybe it's time to write your own. She turned to him. How you know things. About the company. About him. His operations. His image. And you've got a name people recognize. Maddie Reed Bishop still means something, especially in Austin circles. She shook her head. I'm not interested in exposing him. This isn't about revenge, Caleb said. It's about truth, about reclaiming your voice before someone else uses it for you. She looked away, emotions swirling too fast to sort. You don't have to decide now, he added. But you've got people here who believe in you. Your dad, me, maybe even a whole lot of others who've been quiet too long. Maddie stared at the open sky, her heart pounding. For the first time, the story wasn't just about loss. It was about taking back the pen. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the porch, painting everything in a honeyed hue. Maddie sat curled into the wicker chair, a throw blanket around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. A storm was brewing, not in the sky, but in her chest. The article had only confirmed what she already knew. But seeing it, seeing them, made it real in a way that words in Cameron's office never had. She hadn't just been replaced. She was being erased. She pressed her hand to her belly, slow and deliberate. "Not anymore," she whispered. The screen door creaked behind her. "Thought I'd find you out here," Harlan said, stepping outside with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Storm's not far off." She didn't answer, just took the glass and stared at the horizon. "I saw the news," he added after a beat. She looked at him sharply. "You did. I have eyes, Mads. And contacts. One of my guys flagged the merger this morning." Maddie took a slow sip of the tea, the ice clinking gently against the glass. He didn't waste a second. Not even a whisper of respect. Harlan sat beside her. "You think he ever cared about respect?" "No," she said softly. "But I thought he cared about me." "That's the part that stings the longest," he murmured. She turned to face him. "What would you do if you were me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "Do you want to rebuild or burn it all down?" She exhaled slowly. "I want to rebuild. But I want the truth told." He nodded like that answer pleased him. "Then we'll do it right. Your way." She tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't go storming into court or tabloids. You don't blast him online. You don't stoop. You rise. With strategy." Her brows lifted. "You've thought about this." "I've been preparing for it since your wedding," he said, only half joking. Her lips twitched. "You really didn't like him, huh? I didn't like the way he looked at you, like you were a campaign asset." The front gate clanked open in the distance. A familiar pickup truck rolled up the gravel drive. Maddie straightened in her seat. Caleb stepped out, a manila folder in hand. "You busy?" he called out. Harlan waved him up. "Not yet." Maddie stood as Caleb approached the breeze picking up around them. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the folder. "Something I thought you should see," he said. "From a friend of mine in corporate compliance." He laid the folder on the table between them. Inside were screenshots, expense reports, financial statements, wire transfers. Nothing illegal on the surface. But the deeper she looked, the more patterns emerged. Travel booked under dummy accounts. Lavish gifts hidden under consulting fees. Multiple large deposits routed to Zara's creative firm, an entity that hadn't posted a single project since it was founded. Maddie's stomach turned. "This is how he moved money around her," Caleb said quietly, "to keep it off Viridian's books. And your name out of the trail." She stared down at the papers, her heart pounding. "If this goes public," she said, "his shareholders will panic." He knows that, Harlan added. "Which is why he's moving fast with the merger. He wants to seal it before anyone asks questions. And if they do," she asked. Caleb met her eyes. "They'll look for someone who knew. Someone with enough credibility to speak out." Maddie inhaled sharply. "Me." "You don't need to go public," Harlan said, voice calm. "But you do need to protect yourself. And that baby?" Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach again. "I don't want a war," she said. "I want freedom." "Then start by reclaiming your name," Caleb said. "Your own accounts, legal footing. Press reset." "I signed everything under the marriage trust," Cameron insisted. "Trusts can be challenged," Harlan said, "especially if fraud is involved." Maddie looked between them, the man who raised her, and the man who'd quietly stepped into her corner without asking for anything. "I can't believe I'm doing this," she whispered. "You're not starting a fight," Caleb said. "You're ending one that was already happening behind your back." She stared at the papers again, then stood. "Okay," she said. Let's start with a lawyer. Someone who doesn't play golf with Cameron. Harlan smiled. I know a woman in San Antonio. Tougher than a steel boot and smarter than most senators. Maddie nodded. Book it. She looked at Caleb. You've done a lot for someone who barely knows me. He shrugged, a slight flush coloring his neck. I knew you when you were real. That's enough for me. Her eyes held his for a moment. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet. But a trust deeper than chance. The wind picked up again, sweeping through the porch. For the first time, Maddie didn't flinch at the change. She welcomed it. The drive into San Antonio was quiet, save for the hum of the highway beneath the tires and the occasional soft turn of Maddie's wedding band in her palm. She no longer wore it, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away, not yet. Not until she understood what all of it had meant and what part of her it had buried. She sat in the passenger seat of Caleb's truck, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching a file folder of documents, bank records, legal agreements, and the photographs that confirmed more betrayal than she ever asked for. Caleb glanced over now and then, not speaking, just offering his quiet presence like a steady rhythm. You okay? He finally asked. She took a breath, not answering right away. I don't know what I am, she said, eyes still on the road. Nervous, angry, tired, embarrassed, hopeful. That sounds about right. I thought I'd feel vindicated, seeing it all laid out. But I just feel heavy, like I've been carrying a truth no one was ready to see. Now they will. I'm not sure I'm ready either. He glanced at her again. Then we take it 1 mile at a time. The law office sat in a quiet part of Alamo Heights, tucked between a florist and a tiny French cafe. It wasn't the sleek kind of place Cameron would have approved of, no mirrored walls or marble floors, but Maddie liked that. The brass doorknob was slightly tarnished. The welcome mat had been there long enough to earn its name. Inside, a receptionist greeted them warmly and led them to a glass-walled conference room. Maddie ran her fingers over the cool edge of the table while Caleb sat beside her, silent but grounded. A moment later, the door opened, and a woman walked in, mid-50s, sharp gray blazer eyes that missed nothing. Madeline Reed, she said, offering her hand. I'm Nora Chase. Your father and I go way back. Maddie stood and shook her hand. Thank you for seeing me. Nora gestured to the seat. Let's get started. As Maddie unfolded the file, her voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. I need to separate myself from my husband, legally, financially, publicly, and I need to protect what's left of my name. Nora nodded as she flipped through the documents. These are detailed. Who compiled them? My friend Maddie said, glancing at Caleb. He has contacts in internal audit networks. Nora didn't miss the subtle look between them. Smart friend, she said. She reviewed the data in silence for several minutes, flipping through statements, timestamps, and receipts. Finally, she sat back. There's enough here to raise flags. Not criminal, not without deeper digging, but reputational damage. That's a given, especially if this creative firm has no actual clients. It's a front, Caleb said. All fluff, no product. Nora nodded. And the merger? Maddie's hands clenched slightly. I believe it's a distraction. A way to bury any backlash before the truth surfaces. Well, here's what we can do. Nora began already shifting into action. First, we file a legal motion to pause any spousal entitlements based on these funds. Then we contact Viridian's compliance committee anonymously. If they begin an internal inquiry, the merger process will slow. He won't know it came from you. Maddie nodded slowly. And my name, once the process begins, will file a press statement. Short, controlled, nothing explosive. Just a simple message that you've stepped away from the partnership and have retained legal counsel to ensure transparency. You're not accusing, you're protecting. she exhaled. That word, protecting, it sounded like breathing room. What about the baby? She asked softly. Nora paused. Have you told him yet? No. Then that's your decision. Legally, he has rights, but if he abandoned support early on, that matters. We can document it. Caleb's voice was quiet. He left her without access to medical care. No prenatal coverage, no personal accounts. Nora's eyes sharpened. We'll include that. Every detail helps. The meeting stretched for nearly 2 hours. Papers signed, statements drafted, timelines discussed. By the time Maddie stepped back out into the warm afternoon light, her legs felt like water. She walked to the edge of the sidewalk, staring out at nothing, the city bustling around her. You did it, Caleb said gently beside her. She shook her head. I started it. That's the hardest part. They walked a few steps in silence. Then she asked, Do you think people will believe me? I don't think it matters, he said, because the truth will. Eventually. She looked at him. Really looked the way he didn't flinch under pressure, the way he didn't ask for anything, the way he stood next to her, like he wasn't going anywhere. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you, she said. You would have, he replied. But maybe not as calmly. She laughed, the sound startling even to her own ears. It felt good. She leaned against the edge of the truck before getting in. I've been trying so hard to keep myself together that I forgot what it felt like to be seen. You were never invisible, Maddie. Just looking through the wrong mirrors. As they pulled away from the curb, Maddie glanced back one last time at the law office, at the old trees that lined the block like quiet witnesses. She was done with silence. Not bitterness, not chaos, just truth. Even if it came slowly, it would come. And this time she'd be the one writing the ending. The evening air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and fresh soil as Maddie stood barefoot in the garden behind her father's ranch house. Tiny garden lights glowed softly along the path, and crickets chirped their nighttime lullaby in the background. She pressed her toes into the damp grass, grounding herself. This had become her evening ritual. So much had changed in such a short time. She could still feel the echo of her conversation with Nora, like a low current under her skin. Legal documents, quiet investigations, strategic disclosures. It all felt so adult, so far removed from the girl who once dreamed of love stories with clean endings and simple truths. That girl was gone. But in her place, a woman was rising, one who knew how to bend without breaking. She placed a hand over her belly. The baby would know her story. Not the polished version Cameron tried to stage, but the real one, messy, brave, unfinished. Honest? A soft crunch of gravel behind her pulled her from her thoughts. She turned. Caleb was there, hands tucked into the back pockets of his jeans, eyes searching her face like he'd been reading it from afar. Sorry, he said, nodding toward the path. Didn't mean to interrupt. Harlan said you were out here. Maddie smiled faintly. You're not interrupting? He stepped closer, but not too close, always aware of giving her space. I brought something, he said, lifting a small brown envelope. It's probably silly, but... She took it gently from his hand, her fingers brushing his again. That now familiar pulse fluttered in her chest. Opening the envelope, she pulled out a printed photo. It was grainy, a little off-center, but unmistakable, a younger version of her, maybe 15 or 16, standing on top of the old water tower at Sunset Hair, wild in the wind arms spread like she was flying. I found it in a box my mom kept, Caleb said. Said you used to sneak up there every summer? Maddie stared at the image, emotion tightening her throat. I used to think if I climbed high enough, I could outrun everything I didn't understand. And did you? She smiled softly, eyes still on the photo. No. But it felt good pretending I could. He watched her a moment. That's the girl I remembered. I haven't seen her in a long time. Well, he said, stepping beside her, she's still in there. Just a little wiser now. Maddie lowered the photo. Why are you being so kind to me? Caleb didn't hesitate. Because I know what it feels like to rebuild. And I know how rare it is to have someone believe in you when everything falls apart. She turned to him. The garden lights caught the gold in his eyes, and the silence between them stretched charged with something neither of them wanted to name yet. I don't know where this is going, she said honestly. I don't even know who I am without all the noise. You don't have to know yet, he said gently. You just have to keep moving forward. A breeze swept through the garden, lifting the edge of her cardigan. She felt the warmth of him beside her, steady, unspoken. Then the screen door creaked again. It was Harlan. Maddie, he called from the porch. Voice tinged with urgency. You've got a call, it's Nora. Her heart skipped. She and Caleb exchanged a glance and she moved quickly toward the house. The phone was already on the kitchen counter, held in place by a paperweight shaped like a horse. She picked it up. Nora Madeline Nora's voice was calm, but clipped. There's something you need to hear before the media does. The Viridian board met unexpectedly this afternoon. What happened? They've paused the merger. Maddie's breath caught. What? There was an anonymous internal tip. Someone connected the dots between Cameron's expense reports and Zara's non-existent creative firm. The audit committee flagged it as a potential conflict of interest. Her knees felt weak. She gripped the edge of the counter. Will they investigate? They're already moving, Nora said. No press statements yet, but the board is panicking. Cameron's being reviewed. They might suspend him pending resolution. Maddie was silent, her pulse pounding in her ears. You're not out of the woods yet, Nora continued, but the cracks are starting to show. Thank you, Maddie whispered. I don't even know what to say. Just be ready. This might get loud. But you're protected. I'll handle the rest. As the call ended, Maddie stood frozen in place, heart racing, the world tilting slightly under her feet. She wasn't the one behind the leak, at least not directly. But someone had made sure the truth couldn't be ignored. She turned to find Caleb standing quietly in the hallway. His expression said everything. You knew, she said softly. I didn't say anything, he replied. But sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing when it's time. She stepped closer, voice trembling. It's happening. Everything I was afraid of, the whole thing's unraveling. He looked at her, steady and calm. And you're still standing? Maddie took a breath. Then another. Something fierce and unbreakable swelled in her chest. She looked him in the eye. I'm not just standing, she said. I'm ready. And for the first time since her world collapsed, she meant it. Rain tapped gently on the wide windows of Harlan's study. As Maddie sat curled on the leather couch, the soft flicker of the fireplace casting golden light across the room. The atmosphere was calm, but it buzzed beneath the surface like the moment before thunder breaks open the sky. Her phone rested on the table in front of her, untouched for the last hour. Messages kept pinging in from people she hadn't heard from in years. Former investors, board wives, quiet assistants, most of them offering some version of "I had no idea," or "I always thought something was off." She didn't reply to any of them. What were they going to do? Undo the years they'd looked away? Harlan paced slowly near the windows, arms crossed, watching the clouds roll in over the hills. They're going to throw him under the bus, he said, voice even. Mark my words, the board doesn't want the heat. They'll act like they had no clue. Maddie turned toward him, her voice quiet. And Zara's name is nowhere official. That's how Cameron set it up. But when the auditors start digging deeper, he trailed off. Maddie already knew what came next. She'd seen enough carefully curated deceit to know the whole tower was built on vanity and borrowed influence. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her belly. The baby shifted softly, as if responding to her heart. "She'll land somewhere else," Maddie whispered. "People like her always do." Harlan walked over and sat across from her, his voice gentler now. "You've done the right thing, Madeline. You told the truth. You kept your dignity." She met his gaze. "And yet I still feel like I'm in the eye of the storm." "You are," he said. "But you're not alone." The words lingered in the air, heavier than they looked. Just then, Caleb stepped into the room. He was soaked from the rain, his shirt clinging at the shoulders, boots' muddy hair damp from wind and weather. But his face said everything. He handed her a sealed envelope. "What is it?" she asked, taking it carefully. "A letter," he said. "From the Viridian legal team. It came through a friend on the inside. You were supposed to be copied on it eventually, but I thought you should see it first." Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore the seal and unfolded the thick, cream-colored paper. She read the first line aloud. "Notice of pending suspension, Cameron Bishop." Her breath hitched. Effective immediately, the board will be initiating a formal inquiry into the misuse of company funds and breach of internal ethics clauses. All public-facing roles are suspended pending investigation. Her voice faded as she scanned the rest. Words like immediate freeze and reputational risk leapt out at her. She looked up slowly, her face unreadable. Caleb knelt beside her. "You okay?" She nodded once, then twice, as if convincing herself. "I thought I'd feel more triumphant," she said softly. "But it just feels like ash." Caleb's eyes held hers. "Because you're not like him. You didn't want to win, you wanted the truth. And I got it." She leaned back the firelight, reflecting in her eyes. They didn't burn with anger anymore, they shimmered with something steadier. Resilience. She looked at Caleb, her voice softer now. "You've stayed. Through all of it." "I didn't stay," he said. "I came back, that's different." Her eyes didn't leave his. "I don't know what this is between us," she said honestly. "But I know it doesn't feel fragile." "It's not," he said. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing hers, tentative, but deliberate. No rush, no pressure, just presence. She squeezed his hand. Outside, the storm cracked thunder rumbling through the hills like a warning shot, but in the study everything felt still. Then her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. Blocked number. She answered instinctively, her voice calm. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. Then a voice she hadn't heard in weeks, smooth, calculated, and suddenly small. "Maddie." "It's me, Cameron." She froze. Even Caleb noticed the change in her posture. "I'm sorry to call like this." Cameron said, the words coming fast, slippery. "But I didn't know who else everyone's turning on me. The board, the press, even Zara's gone silent. She didn't say anything. "I know I hurt you," he continued. "I know I made mistakes. But this is going too far." Maddie took a slow breath. Caleb didn't move. "You think this is too far?" she said evenly. "You think me finding out through strangers that you hid a second life, that you funneled money through fake accounts, tried to silence me, erase me, you think that was okay?" "I was under pressure," he said quickly. "It wasn't personal. It was everything personal, Cameron." Her voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to. I'm not calling to argue," he said, quieter now. I need your help. If you say something, if you speak on my behalf, the board might reconsider." She laughed, once low and breathy, full of disbelief. "You're asking me to save the man who shattered me." There was a beat of silence. "I thought maybe we could find a way to fix some of this." She stared out the window, her hand slowly resting again on her stomach. "I already am," she said. "Just not for you." Then she ended the call. The silence that followed was full. Clean. Caleb sat still beside her, watching her process the final closure. She turned to him. "I think that was it," she whispered. "The last string. Cut." And for the first time since the beginning, she smiled, not from relief, but from the power of choice. The story she had tried so long to survive was finally over. Now she could write the one she wanted to live. The morning sun stretched across the open land like a quiet promise, golden light sliding through the windows of Harlan's ranch house. Maddie stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, watching a hummingbird hover just beyond the glass. The world was still, but inside her something had finally shifted. She had let go of the story she wasn't supposed to carry, of the silence that was never hers to keep. And in its place, a space was growing, something wide, unclaimed, sacred. Morning Caleb's voice came soft behind her. She turned, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You always move that quietly," he chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't want to interrupt your peace." She tilted her head. "You never do." He stepped in, not too close, but close enough for her to feel the gentle gravity that always pulled between them. "You sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I have in weeks." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of understanding of what they'd both walked through to get here. "I need to do something today," she said after a pause, setting her mug down. "I need to go back to the gallery." Caleb blinked. "You sure I don't know?" she admitted. "But I think I need to see what's left. And what I still want. Want me to drive you?" She looked at him, eyes soft but certain. "I'd like that." The gallery stood like a memory wrapped in glass and steel, quiet on the outside, but brimming with echoes within. As she and Caleb walked through the front doors, the scent of wood polish and dried paint greeted her like an old friend. Dust danced in the beams of light, spilling through the skylights. Her heels clicked against the floor, a familiar rhythm in an unfamiliar season. She moved slowly, her hand trailing along the edge of the reception desk, then past the exhibit spaces where she had once curated stories from canvas and sculpture. Everything had stopped when her world cracked. But the art, it remained, waiting. She walked into the back office and paused in front of the wall that used to hold her vision board. The cork was bare now, save for a single thumbtack. Caleb stood behind her, quietly sensing she needed space. "Can I have a few minutes?" she asked gently. He nodded and stepped back toward the main room. Maddie opened the drawer of the desk and pulled out a sketchbook, one she hadn't touched since the early months of her marriage, when hope still felt like a real breathing thing. She flipped through the pages. Lines of possibility, color palettes, notes about future installations that never came to life. At the last page, there was a sketch she barely remembered, drawing a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, wind in her hair arms at her sides. Not spread like wings, not reaching for rescue, just standing, steady. She traced the pencil lines with her finger, a soft breath escaping her lips. Then, as if on instinct, she reached for a pen. She didn't need a full plan. She just needed to begin again. 10 minutes later, she emerged from the office to find Caleb studying one of the larger pieces, a mixed media canvas splashed with gold charcoal and a ribbon of crimson running through the center. "It always reminded me of wildfire," he said, without turning. "Not the kind that destroys, the kind that clears space for something new. She stepped beside him. That was the point. He looked at her then. You're going to reopen it, aren't you? Not just reopen, she said. Rebuild, rename, reclaim it. What are you going to call it? She paused, then smiled. Revive. He nodded, the word sinking in like a warm echo. And then, as if summoned by that moment, Maddie's phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Cameron, or Nora, or the media. It was a name she hadn't seen in months, Gwen Bishop, Cameron's sister. Maddie hesitated. Caleb raised an eyebrow. She answered. Gwen. A shaky breath on the other end. Maddie. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I didn't expect to hear from you. I know. I've been ashamed, Gwen said, voice low. I saw what he did. I didn't say anything. I thought staying quiet meant staying loyal. Maddie was silent, listening. But silence helped him, Gwen continued. Not you. Maddie's voice was steady. You don't owe me anything. I think I do, Gwen said. That audit report, the one that surfaced, it wasn't just an internal leak. I made sure it landed in the hands of the right people. I couldn't fix what he broke, but I could help light the fuse. Maddie blinked, emotion catching her off guard. Why now? Because watching you walk away with your head high, it made me realize who the real force was in that marriage. And I'm done pretending my brother didn't tear everything down around him. A pause. Thank you, Maddie said finally, for helping in your own way. If you ever need anything, Gwen added, I mean it. After the call ended, Maddie turned to Caleb, heart thudding in her chest. It's strange, she said. The world feels like it's breaking open, but not in a bad way. It's not breaking, he said. It's unfolding. She stepped closer, instinct guiding her. Do you ever wonder what this is? She asked quietly. You and me, I don't wonder, he said. I feel it. Every time I see you fight to rise again. She met his eyes, the closeness between them. No longer shy, just real. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too, he said. But maybe we can be scared. Together. And with that, for the first time in a long time, Maddie let herself lean forward, not into fear, but into the quiet, powerful certainty of something beginning again. Maddie stood in front of the gallery window, her reflection blending with the bold lettering now etched in gold across the glass, Revive. It was the first morning of soft opening. No champagne, no cameras, just quiet footsteps, fresh coffee and paper cups, and a small sign by the entrance. Welcome, you made it. She exhaled slowly, smoothing the front of her cream sweater. Behind her, the exhibits were ready, curated with care, each piece telling a story of rebirth, identity, and truth. Her truth. The scent of fresh paint still lingered faintly in the air, mixing with eucalyptus from the diffuser she kept near the front desk. It felt like her space now. Not something borrowed, not something performed, something earned. Doors open in 5, Caleb said from across the room, adjusting a light fixture above a sculpture titled Embers. She turned to him. You're not nervous, he shrugged. You already did the hard part. This, he waved a hand toward the gallery. This is just the echo. She smiled, but her stomach still fluttered. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to anticipation, or arrival. Caleb crossed the floor and gently handed her a small card. This came in the mail this morning. No return address? She unfolded it. Strength is louder when it's quiet. I see you. G. Her chest tightened. Gwen. The gesture hit her harder than expected, not because of the words, but because they meant someone had watched her fall and chose to still believe in her rise. The clock struck 10. A soft chime echoed as the door opened. The first guest stepped in, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, holding a folded umbrella and eyes that looked like they'd seen 100 stories. She glanced around, then at Maddie, and nodded with a small, knowing smile. Maddie returned it. More footsteps followed. A retired teacher from town, a young couple whispering about the symbolism in a charcoal piece. 2 art students, a single father holding his daughter's hand as she pointed at the colors and asked questions in a whisper. The gallery filled slowly, not just with people, but with presence. Caleb moved quietly through the space, adjusting angles, answering questions, never hovering. He was just there as he'd been from the start, sturdy, warm, unshaken. Around noon, Nora arrived sleek in a tan trench coat and heels that clicked with purpose. She took one look around and gave a short, approving nod. This, she said, is going to make the city talk. Maddie grinned. Not sure I'm ready for all that. Nora leaned in, eyes twinkling. Oh, you are. You just forgot who you were for a while. Now you're reminding everyone else. They walked the gallery together, pausing at a large canvas Maddie had titled Inheritance, a swirl of broken glass patterns reformed into a mosaic phoenix wings flared, subtle but potent. This is the one Nora whispered. The moment. The headline. Maddie was about to respond when the gallery assistant appeared at her elbow. There's someone asking for you in the back. Said you'd know him. She frowned slightly, exchanged a glance with Caleb across the room, then nodded and headed toward the private viewing space in the back. The soft light filtered through linen curtains as she stepped in and froze. Harlan stood by the window, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a man she hadn't seen since she left the city. Jeremy Fields. Once Cameron's closest confidant. The man who'd arranged business deals in silence and whispered in the corners of investor galas. But he had also been the one who warned Maddie once, subtly carefully, that the numbers weren't adding up. Jeremy, she said, her voice careful. He looked older now, not in years, but in weight. Regret, maybe. Maddie, he said. Thank you for seeing me. She nodded once. What brings you here? He glanced at Harlan, then back at her. I wanted to tell you something before it hits the wires. She stiffened. Cameron's officially being removed. The board voted this morning. It's over. Her chest rose, then fell. There were no fireworks. Just release. Good, she said softly. Jeremy hesitated. There's more. Zara's stepping away, too. Her publicist framed it as a creative sabbatical. But you and I both know what that means. Maddie's face remained composed. Jeremy, she said gently, what are you looking for here? He sighed, then met her gaze. Closure. Maybe peace. I saw what happened to you and I didn't speak up. I let fear keep me complicit. I've lived with that. She paused, then nodded. Then you know what to do moving forward. He understood. Make better choices. Louder ones, she added. Silence helped them thrive. He nodded and Harlan quietly led him out, leaving her standing by the tall windows, light painting her face in gold. Caleb appeared behind her, watching her in the reflection. You okay? She nodded. It's not a win. It's not revenge. It's just balance. They stood there for a long moment, the hum of quiet conversations drifting in from the main gallery. Then she turned to him. You know what I want now. He waited. I want to make space for joy, not just survival, not just strength, real joy. Caleb smiled. Then let's make space. And just like that, it felt like the first page of something new, not a chapter continuing, but a story finally her own. The following evening, just before sunset, Maddie stood on the edge of the hill behind her father's ranch. The horizon was drenched in orange, and rose gold bleeding into the sky like the close of something sacred. Below her, the pastures stretched wide and quiet, the wind brushing gently through tall grass like it was whispering stories too old for language. Her hand rested on the curve of her belly, where the baby had begun moving with more purpose lately. Soft turns, little nudges like gentle reminders. I'm here. I'm coming. We're doing this together. She heard the sound of boots behind her and didn't need to turn to know it was Caleb. He stopped beside her, his jacket open to the breeze, holding a thermos in one hand. "Thought you could use some warm cider," he said. She took it, smiling softly. Perfect timing. They stood in silence for a while, watching as the sky deepened into amber. Maddie sipped the cider and let the quiet wrap around her. "I've been thinking," she said, not looking at him yet, "about what it means to really let go." Caleb waited. "I don't mean forgiving, Cameron. I mean forgiving myself for not seeing it sooner, for shrinking myself down just to keep a version of love alive." She turned to him. "Do you know how many mornings I woke up and convinced myself that all the small discomforts were normal? That distance was just part of success." He nodded, not in pity, but in recognition. "I do," he said, "because I've done the same." Different story, same silence. They shared a look, the kind that doesn't ask for explanation, the kind built on mutual scars that turned into strength. "I didn't come here to be saved," Maddie said, voice firm. "I came here to remember who I was before I ever learned how to disappear." And now Caleb asked, his voice, low, steady. She looked out across the hills again, her breath catching on something beautiful and quiet. "Now I remember?" He stepped closer, not intruding, just anchoring. "And us?" he asked. She smiled faintly, still unfolding. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Is that okay with you?" she asked, suddenly, unsure. "More than okay," he said. "I'm not in a rush to arrive anywhere. I just want to walk beside you." The sky turned lavender as the sun slipped down behind the hills and the first stars began peeking out. Maddie reached out and took his hand. "I don't know where this leads," she said. "But for the first time in years, I'm not afraid to find out." They stood there, the two of them silhouetted against the coming night, not clinging to the past or bracing for the future, just being. Later, they drove back toward the ranch. The roads were quiet, the headlights catching glimpses of deer at the edge of the trees, and the hum of the engine was a comforting background to the stillness between them. As they pulled into the gravel drive, the porch light glowed warmly. Harlan stepped out with a small grin. "Thought you two might have just kept driving," he said. Maddie laughed. "Tempting. I've got a little surprise," Harlan said, stepping aside. From inside the house came the sound of soft piano live, not recorded. "What is that?" Caleb asked. They followed the music inside to find Nora sitting at the baby grand fingers dancing across the keys. She looked up, grinning. "Told you I played? You all just never let me." Maddie blinked. "You came back." "Of course I did," Nora said, rising from the bench. "You think I'd miss the celebration dinner celebration?" Maddie asked, glancing between them. Nora raised an eyebrow. "You launched a gallery, survived a media circus, took down one of the most influential CEOs in the city, and you still have better hair than me. We're celebrating." Maddie couldn't help but laugh, a real full laugh. Dinner was simple, but warm: roasted vegetables, grilled salmon cornbread, and Nora's homemade apple pie that Caleb swore was too good to be legal. Laughter filled the room, bouncing off the walls, wrapping around Maddie like a long-forgotten song. Later, as the dishes were cleared and Harlan pulled out a vintage bottle of sparkling cider to toast, Maddie stood tapping her glass gently. Everyone turned toward her. She looked at them, her father, Nora, Caleb, and felt something rise in her chest. Gratitude, grace, growth. "I don't have a speech," she began, "because I've spent so much of my life carefully scripting what I thought people needed to hear." She paused, letting her breath catch. "But lately I've learned that the most honest things come out unscripted. Like the way silence can hold truth, or how survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just staying, choosing to keep going when you don't know what's next. She looked at Caleb, her voice softening. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it walks in quietly, waits at the door, and says, "I'll be here when you're ready." She lifted her glass. To healing, to new chapters, and to the people who help us remember who we've always been. Glasses clinked, the fire crackled, and somewhere deep inside her past the grief, past the anger. Maddie felt something open, wide, and weightless. Joy. Not loud, but unmistakably hers. The rain started just before dawn, soft as breath on glass, coating the windows of the gallery in a glistening veil. Inside the world was still. Quiet. Sacred. Maddie sat at her office desk, one hand resting over her swollen belly, the other holding a pen hovering above a blank page. The journal was new, a leather-bound gift from Caleb, and she'd been saving it for this moment. Not to write her story, but to write hers. Her daughter's. Outside the door, Revive was preparing for its first major exhibition under Maddie's new direction. People would arrive in a few hours, collectors, locals, artists, strangers. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the stillness, and the truth inside it. She finally put the pen to paper. You were born from the fire I thought would destroy me. And yet here we are. There was a knock on the door, soft, respectful. "Come in," she called, already knowing the rhythm of the knock. Caleb stepped in damp from the rain, his jacket dusted with droplets, and his smile steady as ever. He looked like the kind of man who could weather any storm because he already had. "Thought you might need this," he said, holding out a mug of peppermint tea. "You are without question the best decision I never saw coming," Maddie said, accepting the cup. He gave a half smile. "I've been called worse." She stood stretching a little, then walked over to the window. The gallery outside the office was bathed in soft lighting, highlighting each piece just so. Her team had done an incredible job, and she'd let them something the Maddie of 2 years ago wouldn't have known how to do. "Think she'll like it?" she asked. "Who our daughter? I want her to grow up seeing beauty where others see ashes." Caleb walked up beside her. "Then she'll see it, because she'll watch you live it." She glanced at him, heart swelling with something too big for words. "You really think I'm ready? You were ready the second you stopped asking permission to be yourself." A silence bloomed between them. Not empty, not hesitant, just full. Maddie reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "Stay close today, always." She rested her head on his shoulder, letting the rhythm of rain and breath hold her. Hours later, the gallery buzzed with life. Guests moved from one piece to another, murmuring, pausing, reflecting. Maddie wore a floor-length navy dress, simple but striking, her hair curled gently over her shoulders. She glowed not from lights, not from makeup, but from arrival, from peace. Nora stood by the entrance, taking mental notes for her next pitch, and Harlan mingled with a small group of old ranch friends who somehow looked both out of place and entirely at home. Maddie stepped up to the podium just as the main lights dimmed a spotlight, casting a soft halo around her. "Thank you," she began, voice clear, calm, and filled with meaning. "When this space first opened years ago, I believed it would help others find their voice. What I didn't expect was that it would lead me back to my own." She looked around at the faces watching her, some familiar, some strangers, and yet in this moment all deeply connected. "I've learned something," she continued. "Pain isn't the end of your story. Silence isn't safety, and survival, that's just the beginning." She paused, placing a hand gently over her belly. "I stand here not as someone who triumphed over betrayal or rebuilt her life from ruin. I stand here simply as someone who refused to stop believing that beauty still exists, that love can be kind, that power doesn't come from control, but from choosing grace again and again. Soft applause. A few misty eyes. As the lights returned and people wandered back to the artwork, Maddie stepped down from the platform, greeted by hugs and quiet congratulations. Later, as the crowd thinned and twilight crept in through the windows, she found herself in front of her favorite piece, the cliff. It was the one she had sketched months ago alone in the back office. A woman standing at the edge, not flying, not falling, just standing. And now it hung here, framed, finished. I saw you standing here. Maddie turned. Cameron. He looked older, thinner, dressed too formally for the vibe of the night. He stayed a respectful distance, his hands in his pockets, his voice low. I wasn't going to come inside, he said. I just wanted to see if it was real, if you were real. She said nothing, just looked at him. He glanced around the gallery. You did all this? I did. There was something hollow in his expression, not just defeat, but the realization that everything he thought made him powerful hadn't saved him. I lost everything, he admitted. You lost yourself long before the money disappeared, she said gently. He nodded. You always had a way of seeing what I wanted to hide. She stepped forward, not out of affection, but out of finality. You didn't break me, Cameron. You woke me up. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and turned to leave. No dramatics, no begging. Just a man walking away from a life that no longer included her. As the door closed behind him, Caleb appeared, gently wrapping his arm around her waist. You okay? She smiled. More than okay. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened, washed clean. The night air carried the scent of earth and possibility. As she stood there breathing it in, her baby shifted one strong kick, then stillness. She laughed softly. I think she approves. Caleb leaned close, pressing a kiss to her temple. She's going to be something, Maddie. She already is. They walked out of the gallery hand in hand into the fresh night, where the world felt less like something to fight, and more like something waiting to be loved. And for the first time in a long time, Maddie didn't look back. She didn't need to. She was already home.